Welcome to the Solemn Vanguard channel. Today we are talking about what are my predictions for the coming ban list for Vanguard, both Premium and Standard. Now this is not necessarily what I want to happen, this is what I believe will happen. There are quite some things that I would love to hit, but it's not necessarily something that Bushiroad would love to hit. Dr. O apparently alluded to the fact that something will be hit. So let's not assume that it's a no changes list. If it's a no changes list, okay, we've all been trolled. Ha ha ha. But I don't think that's the case. I don't think they would have said that on stream. So let's start with Standard, because it's probably the shortest thing. Right now, if we look at tournament representation, it is relatively diverse. However, the obvious elephant in the room is still Bermuda Triangle. Now, some people may say, oh, but they're no longer topping 50%. Okay, but that doesn't mean it's like a fine deck. Their representation rates are still very high. And generally, Bushiroad, one of their factors isn't whether something takes all the tops. One of their factors is also how much is it played. Because they don't want just top diversity, they want play diversity. So it's less represented than it used to be, but it's still very represented. And more importantly than that, their conversion rate is still amazing. Meaning, sure, less people overall play with it, but if we look at top 3, Bermuda is almost always in it. So there's many decks that are doing well, way more than before. Obviously, when Melody dropped, Bermuda was just tier 0. We're not even gonna argue it. All the way to the Heroic Evolution, I would argue it was the only deck you had to play. Nova's good. I will have to say fine. Let's say Bermuda, very top. Then you have Novas, maybe Messiah, Kagero. Those were like the decks you could play. Before that, it was just Bermuda. So then, obviously, new decks got support. Stuff got a bit better. But Bermuda is still somewhat king. We look at these Japanese tournaments, and sure, they'll say top 8, only 2 Bermudas. Cool, that's more diverse. But then the first place will still be a Bermuda. Very, very often. So overall, it still sometimes feels like the best deck. Sure, some decks are better matchups than others, but it's still like the big thing. And it's still the most represented deck overall. So if Bushi wants to keep selling boosters, then they will want to promote new clans being played more. I don't think a distributor can even get any Melody cases anymore. So money-wise, they don't really get anything from Bermuda anymore, unless there's like hella stock left, but I don't think so. The other argument is, since Standard power creeps so fast, hitting Bermuda now is pretty moot, because in 3 sets they might be even irrelevant. We kinda thought that would have been the case way sooner though. So Melody is like, what, 5 sets ago, and it's still best deck, arguably? Maybe 6 sets, 7 sets? Damn, like, if you're thinking in Phantasmal land already, the power creep really didn't hit them all that hard yet. The other decks, yes. Like, if you're still playing with a Vilas the leader deck, goodbye. But Melody just kept up. So maybe they'll hit it for that reason. With that being said, would I hit it right now? Yeah, because it's like a super helmet deck. Like, most decks are already pretty easy, but then Bermuda is just the king of ease to play and being able to do very unfair things on turn 3. And we already noticed that some of the decks in Raging Tactics really only get good at like turn 4. So it's a bit weird that we're still working with Soul Blaster grade 3 skills whilst Bermuda is at full power on turn 3. So maybe they'll do something about that. So the question is what? There are 2 sides to this argument. Bermuda's early game is very strong, which makes their late game way scarier. Because if you are able to go Lieselot into something, doesn't even matter, either a free booster or a Melody unit, and go ham even harder, but you are able to push early damage, which means once you ride 3, they're already at 3 or 4, and then you're just, it's GG. So by nerfing their early game a little, by, for example, hitting Lieselot or maybe hitting Mine, you are already nerfing them a bit, and then their late game super high powered stuff is less threatening. I'm not a big fan of that idea, because you're already kind of just hoping to hit that early game, and sometimes they don't even draw into it, and they still have a fine game. They just get better with a better early game. So if you hit just the early game, first of all, they have some really good early game cards. What are you even gonna do? They have plenty of trial deck cards and cards that just plus for free, so hitting Lieselot, sure, they'll get less unfair. Also, if you're gonna hit Lieselot, that suddenly makes one of your trial decks illegal for play in tournaments. I don't think Bushiroad would do that. Because imagine a new player, they go like, oh, I just started the game and I bought this Chocolate Melody deck. Cool. and then they go into a tournament and they say, yeah, you can't play that. Those slots limited to 1. Like, no, there's no way they would do that. So then the question becomes, if it's not something from the Melody trial deck, it has to be one of the Melody units. Now, the biggest suspects, of course, are Caro and Sonata. It's what makes the deck so insane. Issue is how? You can't ban Caro, because then the deck is really bad. If you don't let Melody units boost, then they basically cap at what, 18k? You will never have many Sonatas on board, because you also want to keep one in hand to keep rewriting. And unless you sacked into like a bunch, but I doubt it, usually you'll have 1 or 2 by turn 3 or turn 4. If you don't ban Caro, however, then you never solve the issue, because you get to Caro stack and you just keep going. One thing you could do is a limit on how many copies you can play of both overall. So you could say, oh, you can have 5 copies of either Caro or Sonata, and you can choose how many, but you can no longer go to 8. That would put a little bit of a break on the deck. It's a bit painful. I think 40% of games you wouldn't even notice, unless, of course, you come up against decks like Naru or Kagero. Currently, people say, oh, Naru and Kagero are really painful for Bermuda, and that is true to an extent, but the Bermuda player can also not be a monkey and not overextend and still win. Because if you just call down 1 Caro, even though you're holding 2, sure, your lines will be smaller, but if they didn't wipe your field, next turn you have a new field and you can keep on going. If you can no longer do that, by them limiting the amount you can run overall, now you just have your 1 play and you die if you go up against Kagero or Naru. So that could be somewhat of a solution. I really don't know. Remember, we are also getting the Bermuda booster in December, so they still want to make sure that in December they can A, sell cards, but B, the deck can't be totally useless because they still have to sell a whole booster. Unless, of course, it's a completely new archetype. We already know we are getting, I think, Coral and Riviere, but I doubt those will be decks by themselves. Maybe they will be. I really don't know. But so that's where I would kind of end the big standard tangent. I don't think they'll hit Lieselot. So like TLDR, I don't think they'll hit Lieselot because it's a trial deck card. I think it'll be one of the Melody cards. Some kind of choice restriction would be the best move. But I could also see them go like, okay, we limit this card to 1 and that's going to be very painful. Maybe Sonata to 1. I think if you actually outright banned Caro, the deck is dead. That's what I think. Yes, I do own the deck. No, I don't care if it gets hit. So I play Bermuda in Standard because it's just too damn good. It's just unfair, but I don't care if it gets hit. So that's now you know how biased or unbiased I am. But I think that's what's gonna happen. I don't think they'll hit Caro because that actually kills the deck. And I think they'll hit Sonata or a choice restriction. Choice restriction would be the very best, but it's a bit more complex to explain to players. So I don't know if they'll go for that. Anything else in Standard? No. I don't think anything else will be hit. The overall power creep wheel will just keep up. I think they'll just hit Bermuda for the overall health of the community and so forth. Now, for Premium, that's where things get a bit more interesting. Note how they put only Bermuda on the watch list the last time and nothing else. Considering something will be hit, well, if something will be hit in general, it will be, I think, Ellie or Sandy. I don't think Aqua needs to be hit. Having 6 PGs, sure, is strong, but you are taking your grade 1 slots, and if you hit Ellie/Sandy, Aqua is no longer the issue. Whereas if you hit Aqua, the deck is still fine. The other question, however, is, do we even need to hit Bermuda? In the West, people seem to be under the impression that Bermuda is not a good deck anymore. It is still just a tanky as hell deck, I would say. But it's no longer the dominating force that it was in the Springfest era. Like in the last Springfest season, Ange was the best deck by far, and now you could argue that it's not. However, considering it was the second most represented deck in BCF, and that seems to be the data Bushiroad is currently looking at, it could be hit since it was already on the watch list, and it has been one of the best decks ever since the format started. We had Premium and Standard being introduced. Ange was one of the best decks up till NLK basically. Then NLK was the best deck, and then once NLK got hit, Ange became the best deck, and then the Premium collection came out. Now it's not really the best deck anymore, but still very strong. So the big question is, does that warrant a hit? Maybe it's just the fact that, oh, Ange has been so good for so long, maybe they will be hit this time. Now, I don't think they'd hit Ange herself, because that doesn't really address the fact that Bermuda has the strongest defensive cards in the whole game. I think it'll be Ellie and or Sandy, and then it just depends how, right? There are Bermuda variants that don't run Aqua, that only run one Sandy. So it could be argued that Ellie is the very best card. If they're gonna be hitting Bermuda, which is likely, just because it's already been on the watch list for so long, then it will probably be Ellie. Just because, you know, Sandy becomes slightly more fair once Ellie is hit, because which G-guards do they even use? They could go for Citron, which gets as big as a plot maker, but you lose a card from hand. And that's really not all that great. You have the other ones that are like Choo-Choo related, you have Leona, but nothing really gets actually big. So if you only have one Ellie, Sandy is fine, I would say. It still gets you around Luard, but that's basically it. Now, the other deck that people want to see hit is Ezel. A little history lesson for people who don't know Ezel. When Ezel came out in English in Premium in December 2018, it was basically the most brain-dead deck in the format. It was actually ridiculous. You did your coin flip or your dice roll, you went first, you have Bowmains, cool, GG. There was no play you had to make either. You did your one singular thing, your superior ride with your wonder Ezels, and that's that. That's the end of the game. You did your one thing, and if you didn't do it, you lost. If you did do it, you won. However, then Miyagi came, and suddenly there was slightly more you could do. You could do some combos with Brenius, you could do some combos with Ravenhair, you had the older Ravenhair that you could maybe tech in, you could go second, right up into, like, do your Bowmain stuff right up into Ravenhair, have that confirmed 2 damage, and maybe land a kill there, or at least put yourself into such an advantage that sure, your opponent got first stride, but you're still winning. So suddenly there was a bit more of a back and forth. They overall got stronger, but now Ange was no longer being annihilated by NLK, so Ange's defensive capabilities actually helped them stop Ezel to a certain extent. Now, Ezel was still a really easy deck to pilot, so I would say if we had, let's say it's a skill scale, 10 is the most skillful and 0 is the least skillful, then December Ezel, or Worlds Ezel basically, is like a 1. It was so helmet. However, then Ravenhair came out, and Brenius came out. I would dare to say it became a 3. It was still easy, but it wasn't insanely easy, because you still had a few things you could do. Now, suddenly comes the Premium Collection, Spearex. This added a few more things you could do, and instead of a 3, maybe now it was a 4 or a 5. Then we have the whole Axel 2 thing, so you suddenly have hand, and of course you still had all the Brenius stuff, you had the Wonder Ezel. There were added things that made this deck had more moving pieces, so it became even less helmet. And more importantly, since other decks were buffed with such lethal power, suddenly the Ezel player when going second had to actually work. Because it wasn't just, oh, I go first, I win, I go second, I lose. It was, I go first, I probably win, I go second, I maybe win. And you actually had to start thinking about quite some things. You had to start guarding certain things early, even though you wanted damage, because otherwise you would get blown out by certain first strides. So I would dare to say it then eventually, now, even with Platina, if you want to run that and so forth, it's more like a 7.5 out of 10 on the skill scale, if we have to call it like that. It is no longer the super brain dead deck. So I don't want to see it hit purely based on that, because if we're gonna hit something based on brain deadness, it would have to be Neo Nectar, not Ezel. However, Neo Nectar doesn't actually have all these results to back it up, because if it doesn't sack, it's not all that strong. Should Ezel be hit? It was the most represented deck in the BCF. So that is the data Bushi seems to value most. And in this BCF, I think it was only like 4 or 5 events. I'm not sure how far their scope goes, but there it was the most represented. However, it was never on the watch list. So will they hit it? I don't know. Some people argue that the Kriff Superior Ride is unfair. I agree. Because if you get it off, you can win regardless of your opponent's input. However, 70% of the time, you won't because you either went second or you didn't get Bowmains or, well, a combination there. And then you actually have to start working for your win. But that 30% auto win time is still unfair. It could be hit over that. I would agree with hitting it over that. But will they? It's not on the watch list. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if the list is hitting Bermuda, because it was already on the watch list and has been so strong for so long. So then it would be Ellie to 1. And then Ezel gets hit in some way, because it's so represented and people... It's also been strong for long, by the way. Like, ever since December 2018, that's pretty long. However, Premium is kind of known for having decks last longer. If you bought Luard, Dragfall variant in GBT 14, you have had a meta deck for... ever since then, more than a year. If you bought Luard in GBT 12 or the trial deck, you've had a meta deck for more than 2 years. Sure, you've had to upgrade and so forth, but in general, I would say G into Premium, quite some decks last longer. So having a deck be good for so long isn't necessarily a reason for banning, but I could definitely see the argument there as well. Now, other decks that could be hit. People are asking for OTT to be hit in some way. I'm not really sure about that. Because what would you even hit? Some people say, oh, ban Tom. Like, no. The Ichi-Tom combo hasn't been played in any of the competitive decks for so damn long. Because the new Ichi-Kishima is just way faster and better. Sure, it's not fun to not be able to guard, but it's super slow. If not being able to guard is your measure for banning cards, then we should be banning Violence Franger from Grand Blue as well, in Standard even. Standard literally has the Ichi-Tom combo in one card, and it's just as slow. No, it's even faster. It's turn 4, whereas Ichi-Tom, technically, you could turn 4 it if you ride up and G-guard, but otherwise it's turn 5. So your measure for banning something shouldn't be, oh, I think this is unfair that I don't get to guard. Like, no, you should have just guarded early. Violence Franger shouldn't be hit, so Silent Tom shouldn't be hit. The bigger issue is the new Ichi. The problem is that new Ichi needs to unflip anything else. So even if you put new Ichi to 1, sure, that kinda hurts them, but they still have the same strong first stride, just 1k less power. I don't think they really care, as long as they can actually hit the kill on that first stride. Now, apart from that, the deck really isn't doing so hot. We see in Japan Gold Paladin, Bermuda, even Luar doing better. Neo Nectar also just destroys that deck. So are you gonna hit it? It just doesn't have the results. As much as it's not necessarily fun if you're not prepared for it. Like, if you're not prepared, you ride up, they stride and you die. You're like, oh no. But very often, if you guarded early, or if you fought the grade 2 game, which they really can't. Like, Rectangle Magus is their one early game card if they run the conventional build, and most people do. Or if they ran the Ryo Gyoza build, they have no early game. They just get blown out early, and then they don't have the Bobos, and then they're just bad at that point. It's not doing too hot, so I don't see them hitting that. As much as it can be unfun when you're unprepared for it, that's really not the basis by which Bushiroad limits things. The other things people say is Luard. Now, Luard just gets blown out by rush decks because Neo Nectar is just has a better early game and doesn't take nearly as much skill to pilot. So if you have to consider, do I play Neo or Luard? The answer is almost always Neo. I don't think Luard will be hit. Now, I do own a Luard deck, like, if you want to call me biased about that, cool. But their big issue is their tiny triggers, which makes them very easy to rush. And again, their results really aren't there. They are the third most represented deck in the BCF, I think. Or was it OTT? I think they can be switched depending on the event. Something like that. But their representation isn't all that high either. They do get blown out by rush decks. But hey, if they hit all the rush decks, it becomes pretty good. And again, what would you hit? Would you hit Morfessa to 1? Doesn't really do much. Sure, again, they will have an even worse rush matchup, but generally they should be winning on the first stride if they do the whole noise into Raven loop. Like, there are bigger things in this format. Now then there's Gasti, which is again a very strong OTK deck, but it again gets completely annihilated by rush decks. I feel like Gasti is being kept in check by the existence of Neos to one extent, Ezel to another extent, and even Ange has a pretty good matchup because they can just farm all the cards to survive the combo. And if you master of 5th Elemented, wow, you now lost your soul and there's no way for you to recover. Like, once you used Master of 5th Element, you have no recovery in that deck. So I don't think that will be hit either. Now, some people also were asking for Nubatama to be hit. Here's a couple reasons why that's not gonna happen. Jamio Kongo isn't even out yet. So if they're gonna hit it in Japan, okay, then it's 1 month after release, which would be weird. But if then the English ban list follows very soon, it'd be very weird to go, oh, Jammy releases, oh, it's banned. That's not gonna happen. Secondly, it has a very low representation rate. It has a okay conversion rate. So like, despite low representation, it has a couple tops. but it doesn't have this sickening kind of melody level of tops. It doesn't even have Nova Grappler level of tops if we're talking about the standard side. So the tops just aren't there. And the reason is because it's pretty slow. Sure, if you just rode up into 3 and then you G-Guard and then you Rine on your reroad Jamio Congo, they're gonna die, but that's a lot of ifs. And again, you had to ride up to 3 first, which you don't necessarily want to do because you may get blown out by some of these stronger first strides. Secondly, that deck scoops to rush decks, so it gets annihilated by Ezel, it gets annihilated by Neonectar, and again, Ezel is just keeping it in check, Neonectar is keeping it in check. So currently the results aren't too hot, and so it'd be very weird to out of nowhere hit this, again, because it just came out and the results aren't there. So a TLDR, what I think will happen is in Standard we'll see some hit on Bermuda. Even though it may not seem the most necessary from numbers right now, the track record overall has just been so strong and it's still doing extremely well that they'll just go, okay, what? Make some room for the other clans to also start topping and doing really well. And then in the premium side, they'll hit Bermuda because it's been doing so well for so long. And because, well, any kind of Bermuda support will always push Bermuda up again. So we don't even know what's coming in the December support. Maybe the whole Trois Rivière thing will get super strong because the new Rivière has some insane skill. We don't know that yet. Maybe. And then perhaps Ezel, because people don't like the unfair aspect of the whole Crift thing. But then again, it's also a somewhat weird balancing force in the sense that it does keep some other decks in check. So we'll see if they hit that. It wasn't on the watch list, so that's a bit of a maybe. But I don't think they will do anything more than this unless there is some future proofing. The last time we saw a real hit was Enigmatic Assassin and Crook, but before that we saw hits where everyone was like, why did you hit that? And it was because of potential issues with coming support. So we saw some hit in Pale Moon, that like a choice restriction. We saw some hit in DP. We still don't really know why, but hey. So it could be that they hit a few more cards just to make sure that no weird combos come up with future support. And what they could also do is unrestrict certain cards. For example, there is no reason, I would say, to keep Referals limited at this point. Angels is really not doing anything in Premium, so why would you keep that limited? I know you can do the weird loop, but again, if you have to do that on Stride 3 or something like that, who cares? You have these other cards. Are some of the 7-runner cards still on there? Like, if there's still Grand Blue cards from 7 Seas Rush, who cares? So they may unrestrict some of those cards as well. That is basically my thoughts. Hope you found this interesting. If you did, please subscribe to the Solemn Vanguard channel. Tomorrow, of course, we will know how wrong or right I was. We'll see. Like the video if you liked the video and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I will see you soon. Ciao.